I would appreciate that. Um, and we should be good to go. Ashley.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. Okay. Yeah, we had a rough start, but we're here. We made it. So thank you for having me today. I will just, very quickly go over, it's about 15 minutes worth of presentation here, and then take any general questions. If we have specific questions about buildings or tax situations or, whatever, we can also get into that. And my contact information will be provided at the end as well. So I will get started. Good afternoon, everyone. As Sarah said, I'm Ashley Barrett. I work in the Technical Preservation Unit at the New York SHPO. Our unit handles environmental reviews as well as the Historic Rehabilitation Tax Credit Program for commercial properties. Sarah asked me to be here today to talk about the Commercial Tax Credit Program and how you can use it as a tool to revitalize the historic buildings in the commercial center of Oneonta. Just very quickly, I will talk about what the SHPO does, the State Historic Preservation Office. Our office facilitates several programs and services like the tax credit program for both commercial buildings and homeowners, our certified local government program, educational programming, various programs and services that encourage preservation as a means by which communities can achieve their social, economic, and environmental goals. We might also be called the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. Just so you know, it's the same office, just a bureaucratic quirk that we have two names there. So the Federal Commercial Tax Credit Program allows property owners to claim an income tax credit equal to 20% of the qualified expenses of a rehabilitation. The program is administered by the National Park Service, who ultimately issues the certification of completion at the conclusion of a successful rehab project. The tax credit is only available to properties that will be used for a business or other income producing purpose, and a substantial amount must be spent rehabilitating the building. We'll come back in a little bit to how substantial is defined. Financial matters concerning the federal tax credit are handled by the IRS. So what buildings qualify? To qualify for the federal tax credit, the historic building must be listed in the National Register of Historic Places or be certified as contributing to the significance of a registered historic district. If a property is located in a National Register district or a state or local district certified for the purposes of tax credit, it still must be designated by the National Park Service as a structure that retains integrity and contributes to the historic character of the district, thus qualifying as a certified historic structure. It's important to note that not every building in a district is contributing, and that's why we have to go through the certification process. The process for certifying a historic structure for the purposes of the tax credit is part one of the federal tax credit application. The Part 1 review team here at SHPO ensures that buildings submitted for program consideration retain sufficient integrity to be a candidate for rehab. The second requirement for the federal program is that the project must meet the substantial rehab test. This means the cost of the project must exceed the greater of $5,000 or the building's adjusted basis. According to the IRS, the adjusted basis of a building is the cost of the property, excluding land, plus or minus adjustments to basis. The county assessor's office would be able to provide a building to land value ratio. Increases to basis can include capital improvements, legal fees incurred in perfecting title, zoning costs, etc. Decreases to basis include deductions previously allowed or allowable for depreciation. So simplified, the cost of the rehab must exceed the pre-rehab cost of the building. Our office always recommends potential applicants consult with a tax professional before applying to the program. We are not experts in tax law. We can't help you interpret any of the IRS language, so it's always good to bring on someone who is qualified to help you with financial questions. And here is just a simpler formula to figure out your adjusted basis. Again, talk to your accountant, reach out to your county assessor's office, and they will be able to provide you with that exact number. New York State also offers a rehabilitation tax credit for income producing properties. There's no additional application process for this credit. After your Part 3 at the federal application is approved by the National Park Service, the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation will issue a certification allowing property owners to claim the state credit as well. However, New York does have one additional eligibility requirement, and that is that the property must be located within a qualifying census tract. A qualifying census tract is one that's identified as being at or below 100% of the state median family income calculated as of April 1st of each year using the most recent 5-year estimate from the US Census Bureau. Our publicly accessible online database, the Cultural Resource Information System, CRIS, allows property owners to look up their address and see the status of their census tract. And normally I would have a section of the census tract map up here in the slideshow, except that it is March 31st. And that means that tomorrow, April 1st, we have new census tract data coming out. So our CRIS system will be updated to reflect that. I didn't want to include a map that is accurate today and inaccurate tomorrow. But I can go ahead and say we know that every tract in Otsego County will be considered qualifying starting April 1st, 2025 through at least April 1st, 2028. So that is great news. The New York State credit is calculated on a per structure basis with a $5 million cap. This means that a project involving multiple buildings may be eligible to claim the credit cap on each building. For larger projects with qualified expenditures of over $2.5 million, up to 20% of those expenses can be claimed. For smaller projects with qualified expenditures under $2.5 million, New York offers a credit equal to 30% of those expenses. While there's no separate application process for the state tax credit, there are fees associated with the state review. So all told, owners of eligible income producing properties in the state of New York can claim up to 40 to 50% of the qualified rehabilitation expenses incurred on a project. The tax credit program utilizes the Secretary of the Interior's standards for rehabilitation to evaluate proposed work to a historic structure. The standards for rehabilitation provide direction in making appropriate choices and planning the repairs, alterations, and additions that may be part of a rehab project. The standards for rehab are the criteria used to determine if a project qualifies as a certified rehabilitation. The tax credit program is not a restoration program, and these standards do allow for adaptive reuse of historic buildings. The intent of the standards is to assist the long-term preservation of a property's significance through the preservation of historic material and features. The standards pertain to historic buildings of all materials, construction types, sizes, occupancy, and they do encompass the exterior and interior of the building as well. And here are the actual SOI standards, so you guys can see some of the language that we use to determine the appropriateness of proposed work. We don't need to read through all of these. You don't need to know these. Our office knows them. That's what we're here to help you with. The preamble does have some important information that I would like to point out. First, we'll note that the standards are ultimately interpreted by the National Park Service, not by our office. NPS is the entity that gives final certification. So the appropriateness of work is ultimately determined by their office. Obviously, as we do our reviews, we provide input, but the final decision comes down to them. I also want to note that the standards apply to all historic buildings, even the ugly ones, even the brutalist buildings, even buildings from the 60s and 70s, which are now considered historic. We're looking at the complete building, inside and outside, and the immediate setting. And here we have a few tips to avoid common pitfalls and ensure that your project is successful. Make sure that your design and building professionals know what's important going in. We can't expect contractors to identify the character defining features or, be aware of them and make sure they're protected without some direction. Your Part 1 reviewer can help you with this. There should be some character defining features mentioned in your Part 1 as that review is completed. You may also want to bring on a preservation consultant who can liaise between our staff here at SHPO and your contractors. In my experience, working with a consultant eases the stress on property owners and can sometimes make for a faster project. I can't suggest any particular consultants, but I do believe that the Preservation League of New York has a list of consultants who have experience working with this program, so I would recommend reaching out to them. And finally, just make sure that you're completing the work as approved. I can't stress this one enough. What we got in the Part 2, what we've said we're going to do is what we need to do. If you need to make changes to the scope of work, reach out to us and we can make sure that that's documented. Communication is such an important part of having a smooth and successful project here. We can't help if you surprise us at the end of the project with a completely different scope of work than the one that was actually approved. So we can talk a little bit about what qualifies towards the credit here. This is just a short list of some of the most common items that we get questions on. It's obviously not exhaustive. Qualified rehab expenditures, called QREs, are determined by the IRS, and more information is available on their website. We have a few of the big ones here, soft costs, including, architectural drawings, consultant fees, engineer reports that can be included, energy upgrades to your insulation, HVAC, electric, any kind of structural shoring up that you might need, exterior envelope like windows, doors, siding, and interior finishes as well can typically be claimed. Things that typically don't qualify are the cost of the property, site work and landscaping, new additions to the property, new construction, furniture, buildings that are disconnected and not contributing to the significance of the property. Stuff like fencing, also, we get a lot of questions on that would not be able to be claimed as a credit. But do remember that just because something doesn't qualify towards the credit doesn't mean you can't do it. For example, new construction is frequently approved. You just can't claim the credit on that portion of your expenses. And here's a quick overview of our review process. The tax credit reviews are completed in 3 parts with a separate form for each part. The Part 1 review certifies the building as eligible for the program. The Part 2 review approves proposed work. And the Part 3 certifies that the work done conforms to the standards that we just went over. If changes to the work are needed at any time between the Part 2 and 3, that's fine. We just need to file an amendment outlining those changes, and that'll be submitted for review and approval by the NPS as well. The review time for each of these submissions is a minimum of 60 days. And here's one more quick overview of the review process. For each of the project parts, the applicant will provide the necessary documentation to SHPO. Our SHPO staff will review it and then forward it on to NPS with our recommendations, at which point NPS then issues the final determination. And here we have a couple examples of the type of information that you'll have to provide to SHPO and the NPS to complete the review of your project. NPS has standardized forms that you'll need to complete for parts 1, 2, and 3. At the part 2, you'll also need to provide detailed descriptions of the current conditions of your building and your proposed work. That's what's seen on the right there. These forms, including the written work descriptions, are considered tax documents and will be shared with the IRS. So it's important that they're completed accurately and thoroughly. You don't want to put yourself in a position where the IRS is looking at the credits that you've claimed and asking why you claimed credit on something that you didn't actually say in your forms you were going to do. I think that everybody hates filling out forms, but it's really, really important to make sure this is done very thoroughly so that you are not in a position where the IRS has any questions for you at all. It's also important to understand that this program does not provide cash payments. Applicants should know that the tax credit program is just that, a credit towards their owed taxes. The federal tax credit is administered by the IRS, while the New York State credit is administered by our Department of Taxation and Finance. As we've mentioned, thankfully, there's no additional application required to apply to the state credits, but your Part 3 approval at the federal level is required in order for those credits to be awarded. And echoing a little bit of what Sarah said earlier, the data shows that the historic rehabilitation tax credit is making a huge impact here in New York. In the last 13 years, the program has fostered more than $12 billion in private investments in the state of New York. Our office has approved the use of credits for over 1,000 properties across 60 counties. These numbers, I think, were last updated last fiscal year, so they're already outdated. We're growing like crazy. The tax credit program continues to grow at both the state and federal levels, and our office remains committed to developing successful projects. And a few of those successful projects are right in Oneonta, including the Ford block at 186 to 212 Main Street, which was given final certification just a few months ago in December of last year. So they are all finished and I believe open. And then we also have the building at 151 through 153 Main Street, which was awarded final certification back in March of 2020. So that is about all I have. The few of us that are here today are obviously interested in the program. Our office is here to help you navigate the process. Above, I've included my contact information as well as the contact info for Kath LaFranc, who handles the Part 1s for Otsego County. And I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone might have right now, and also available via email anytime.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Stephen or Elaine, any questions for Ashley about anything that we've gone over? Awesome. The good news is that we already have a lot of commercial buildings listed on the National Register, which is one of the criteria for eligibility for the tax credit. And I think you did a really good job, Ashley, of outlining the process for becoming eligible if you are not currently. So we appreciate that as well. If there aren't any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.